Good afternoon, and thank you very much for all of you being here. My name is Ivan Krastev, and I'm the permanent fellow here in the Institute for Human Sciences. And we're very happy to have you for this talk, which we're organizing together with the Ministry of Defense of Austria. And we decided to have a series on the big picture, how the world is changing, the geopolitical dimension of the change. And we really decided to get with the people that not simply know that the world is changing, but they have an idea how it is changing. And the first talk in this series was John Sawyers, the former head of MI6, who was here less than months ago. And now I'm really very happy to introduce to you our second speaker. It's going to be very easy to introduce him because when somebody was a prime minister and minister of foreign affairs for a long time, you don't need to read his CV. And this is exactly what Ahmet Davutoğlu was. But he also is the writer of a very important book, probably one of the most discussed books in the last 10 years when it comes to geopolitics and how we are seeing the world today, called Strategic Depth. So how the world looks like from Turkey. I do believe that the changes that we are seeing are also very much based on how Turkey is changing its foreign policy orientation. And the idea is basically to have a 30 minutes major talk coming from Professor Davutoğlu. Then in 10-15 minutes, I'll try to ask some questions. And then we're going to go for 30 minutes with all of you. So you're going to have a possibility to ask your questions and basically be part of this discussion. As part of this series, we're going to have 4 other speakers, just for those of you who are interested. We're going to have first the former Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Menon, and then we're going to have somebody who was just till a month ago, the Assistant Secretary for Europe in the Trump administration, Wes Mitchell. And then we're going to have Bill Burns, who was Under Secretary of State during the previous administration, and many people expected him to become a Secretary of State if Mrs. Clinton has won. And we're going to end up with Sergei Karaganov, the head of Council for Foreign and Defense Policy of the Russian Federation. So it's a really big name about the big picture, and this is great pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Davutoğlu.
Thank you very much, Ivan, for this excellent and short introduction, because I need more time to talk. It is great. Yes. It is a great pleasure back to be in Vienna, a historic city which I always admired. After I resigned from my position as Prime Minister, I published a book on cities and civilizations. I made special reference to certain cities as the center of civilizations as well as political change. And there I wrote that cities are our teachers. Our teachers are not just human beings. Cities are teaching us more than human beings, in fact. And whenever I came to Vienna, I always learned something new. And right at the center of Europe and where the history flowed throughout the centuries. And again, thanks for this very kind invitation and to Vienna, to Ivan and to IWM, also to Minister of Defense. Today I want to talk about the change in dynamic international order. Ivan mentioned my book, Strategic Depth, in Turkish, translated in more than 10 languages, except English, because there were several proposals to translate, but I wanted to translate myself, which postponed all this translation, which was published in 1999, 2001. So it was an analysis of post-Cold War era. Recently, I completed another book, which will be published soon by Cambridge University Press, on systemic earthquake and the struggle for world order. I will make a short summary of this book. But before, first, about the future of world order, I want to discuss a methodological issue, how to approach the question of international order or world order. Then I will make some reference to systemic earthquake. Why did I prefer earthquake as an analogy in understanding international relations? First of all, about the methodology. Recently, a few months ago, I was in Kazakhstan in Astana Forum. During our discussion, a roundtable discussion, academicians, my former colleagues like President Tadic, Belgian former Prime Minister, President Karzai, and several other academicians. In 2 days' time when we discussed, in my session, I made a summary and I said today, there are two extreme positions regarding the future of international order, especially in post-Cold War era. One is utopic optimism. The other extreme is nihilistic pessimism. When the Cold War has ended, the end of history theory assumed that in the future there will be an era of peace and order based on liberal values, and the history will end. This was one of the most utopic optimism in methodology, which was proposing a future like a heaven on earth. At that time, I was a young academician. I criticized this approach, and I wrote an article and published a book in 1994 criticizing Fukuyama's approach and said, this story will never stop because everything is changing. This is not an end of history. The history will be flowing, will be accelerated, and will flow much faster than before. Because if technology is changing so fast, if there is a huge human mobility on Earth, you cannot imagine that there will be a status quo-oriented order. There will be an order in a dynamic way. In early 1990s, there was such an utopic optimistic approach based on New World Order concept. But now, in these days, wherever you go, whoever talks, the future projection is very much negative. I call this nihilistic pessimism, especially in the last 3-4 years. This nihilistic pessimism is spreading everywhere. The scenarios of Third World War and asymmetric war, there is no real attempt or vision for the future of world order. Both of these are not right approaches for me. And when I criticize both of these approaches in a methodological way, the moderator of the session, Nick Groeney from BBC, he asked me, what is your proposal if you criticize both of these? I said my proposal is realistic optimism. Because if you are in a nihilistic pessimistic way, it is a vicious circle. Nihilistic pessimism will produce more pessimism and you will be trapped. But if you do not see the reality of the world, whatever it is, and if you try to ideologize the future of the humanity, right, what was done by Fukuyama, you cannot understand the existing situation. Yes, we have many challenges. Yes, we have many chaotic situations. Yes, there is no any good, bad success story in international affairs as a peace effort. Yes, the economic rivalry, protectionism is increasing, exclusive populism is increasing, but at the end of the day, we are the ones who will produce an alternative for this chaotic situation. We cannot be self-fulfilling prophecy of pessimistic future, apocalyptic type of future. So how can we first, I will try to give you what is the real picture, then I will make a proposal in a short way, which I analyzed in my book, which will be appearing soon. About the world order, why did I criticize the end of history theory? Because this was egocentric illusion, as Toynbee mentioned before, egocentric illusion of hegemonic powers. All hegemonic powers, when they became the leading power, they thought that they ended the history. Like Pax Romana or Pax Ottomana or now Pax Americana, they all thought that they ended the history. But after the Cold War ended, until now, in the last 25, 30 years now, I emphasize that there were 4 basic earthquakes. Earthquake is a good analogy because as Turks we lived in earthquakes, therefore it is good to project, imagine. Before the earthquake you have to be ready for the earthquake. Earthquake or crisis is fact of life, and crisis is fact of international order. Everywhere, every time, there will be some sort of crisis. It is important thing is you have to be ready for the crisis. If earthquake happens, then you shouldn't be showing panic. You should try to respond properly in a rational way. And after earthquake, there will be aftershocks. You have to manage these aftershocks. Then you have to restore the order. In international system, in the last 30 years, we had 4 big earthquakes, worldwide earthquakes, which had aftershocks, still continuing. One is geopolitical earthquake in 1991, when Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact collapsed. Throughout Eurasia, a geopolitical shift did emerge, which was positive in one sense, but at the same time which had crisis in itself, seeds of crisis in itself. And the aftershocks of earthquakes were in Balkans, Caucasia, Black Sea, Central Asia, from Bosnian crisis to Kosovo, from Transnistria crisis to Abkhazia or Ossetia, and civil war in Kyrgyzstan and in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan civil tension. So that earthquake, although it produced some positive results, had also resulted in several crisis points. And important is, many of the aftershocks of this geopolitical earthquake is still continuing today as a potential of tension, like Georgia-Russia war in 2008 because of Ossetia, like Crimea tension or in Ukraine, like Nagorno-Karabakh issue. I call this era not peace, but ceasefire, prolonging ceasefires. Ceasefire means not peace. Ceasefire is just ending violence against each other, waiting for a future war or peace. And that the aftershocks of these earthquakes are still today valid after 25 years, many of them. Second biggest earthquake was security earthquake in 2001, which 9/11. And the psychology of the world has shifted from democracy to security after 9/11. The priorities, preventive war, concept of preventive war, was the opposite of 1990s psychology, which assumed to have a democratic transformation. And American interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan created certain results. For example, this morning I was talking on EU-US relations. The 1990s was a success period for EU, but after 2001 security earthquake and Iraqi intervention, the relation between US and EU in general has changed. Even George W. Bush at that time used the terminology old Europe, new Europe. Like Cold War time, East and Central Europe, New Europe, the other is old Europe. So the terminology has changed. The international law has been interpreted by every actor based on their security concerns. For Russia it was for Chechnya, for China it was the Xinjiang issue, for everybody, for every actor there was a terrorist for the concept of insecurity because of this situation. The third biggest earthquake was an economic earthquake in 2008. This time, geopolitical and security shifts has been deteriorated with a global economic crisis. The second earthquake still have aftershocks. Today, neither in Iraq nor in Afghanistan have a stable, peaceful order. Still, there is a potential, especially in Afghanistan, also in Iraq. So it means security earthquake did not have any restoration for the future. The potential risks are still there. It has been accumulated. Global economic crisis has shaken the societies and different societal sectors of the countries. It started a sectoral crisis in mortgage sector, and then continued as an economic financial crisis, banking system, then economic crisis altogether, then finally through unemployment, especially in Europe, a political crisis. I remember when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, I had in my term of 4 years, I saw 5 or 6 Greek ministers of foreign affairs because Greek governments were changing. Similarly, 4 or 5 ministers of, even French foreign ministers changed very quickly. Because of these economic problems, there was a general political instability emerging in different European countries in general. And that the result of this earthquake is still continuing. Brexit could not be understood without understanding the impact of global economic crisis. And the economic institutions in many places have been reshaped. We can discuss more on this issue. And the fourth crisis, big earthquake, was structural earthquake, what I call. After Arab Spring and Ukrainian crisis, many nation states had faced structural problems. The institutions of the states collapsed. The territorial control of the states did change. Today in many countries, you don't know with whom you will be coordinating or doing diplomacy, because there are several authorities in the same country, like in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, in Ukraine, in practical sense. The internationally recognized authority and de facto authorities are there. So, and this structural earthquake is continuing. What is the result? The result is, out of these 4 earthquakes, every earthquake brought new accumulation of aftershocks, and we had a systemic earthquake in international order. Systemic earthquake means that not only one crisis or 2 crises together, but system itself, national systems, regional systems, and global system, UN system itself, is facing big structural problems, what I call systemic earthquake. On national level, we can define this as the fragility of the countries, of the nation, of the national order. And on regional base, in many regions today, we have some sort of Cold War emerging, re-emerging, like in the Middle East, like in Gulf. And in global system, there is an absence of inclusivity. Now, what is the solution if we have such a systemic earthquake? We need to have new approaches to this dynamic situation, and there is a need for some new values to be respected. There, based on this realistic analysis of international crisis, I propose 5 basic principles for the restoration of the systems, national, regional, global order for the future. The most important principle is inclusivity. Inclusivity today, and also throughout the history, is the main character of an order. Long surviving orders, when we look at, they are able to sustain and continue in the history if they are inclusive. Let me give you an example. Once, after 9/11, at Princeton University, I gave a conference. At that time, there was a high emotions in American society, rightly high emotions, because of 9/11. First time ever America, who was supposed to be safe in the continent, was attacked in the centers of the country. Because of these emotions, there was preparation when I was there. Afghanistan war started, and there was preparation for Iraq war. In my lecture, I said, what US today, what US needs today is not a new Caesar, but a Marcus Aurelius of Roman Empire. Caesar was the big conqueror to make Roman Empire bigger and influential. And during his time, city of Rome was basically Roman character. But once you conquer many places, you have to be ready. In next stage of history, those conquered lands, human population would come to the capital. This is so natural historical phenomena. And I said, after all these migrations and new United States of America, now what you need is not to fight only, but to be more inclusive. And Marcus Aurelius, as a Stoic philosopher, I admire, one of the leading historical figures in this sense. How to protect Roman order for him, not just fighting to Teutonic tribes, but trying to make Roman Empire more inclusive. And Mitraic temples, Jewish population in Rome, and all the others were facts of that. What is this lesson from Roman Empire? Even in Ottoman centuries as well. During the high centuries of Ottomans, Istanbul was like a mini East Europe, mini Anatolia, mini Mediterranean, mini Asia, etc., because that is the character of the society in this type of situation. And what is the lesson from this Roman experience? Survival, establishing an order might base on military, but sustainability of a political order bases always on inclusivity. Today, in national, regional, and global order, the main challenge is there is a rising exclusivist populism. And in that speech, I made a future projection. I said, today what US needs is a Marcus Aurelius, but a black Marcus Aurelius. The best restoration in US will be by a black president. At that time, President Obama was not in the picture. Later, when he visited Turkey, I was Minister of Foreign Affairs. Just before, after 2 months, I became. That was in the newspapers. Even today, in Europe, I can understand the psychology against refugees, or the psychology against non-Europeans or this. But if British Empire was so dominant in 19th century, like Caesar of Rome, after 2 centuries, London will be multicultural. This is unescapable. From India, from Africa, from everywhere. If French controlled Africa, North Africa for 2 centuries, then Paris will be multicultural. This is a fact of history. You cannot escape this fact. Or if you don't want to be, okay, be like Iceland or a country who do not contact with any other. This is same for us, although we are not big power. People were telling me, why you are so much interested in Balkans, Caucasia, Central Asia, Middle East. I was telling them once, not because I have vacant time to deal like a hobby. No, because there are more Bosniaks in Bosnia than in Turkey than in Bosnia. We have more Albanian in Turkey than in Albania. We have more Kosovars in Turkey than in Kosovo. We have more Chechens in Turkey than in Chechnya. We have more Abkhazians in Turkey than in Abkhazia. We have more Ossetians in Turkey than in Ossetia. We have more Georgians in Turkey than in Georgia. We have the highest number of Uyghurs everywhere in the world except China in Turkey. We have more Kurds in northern Iraqi Kurdistan. Why? Because of our imperial past. People like in Vienna, when you look at who are the second minority, Germans naturally, then Balkan origin people, yes, Austro-Hungarian Empire, this is the legacy, and Turks because of our contacts. So inclusivity is a test. Those powers who accept, who learns this historical lesson will rise, will at least sustain the crisis. But those who deny this, like President Trump saying America first, and in America, WASP first, it is so for American identity especially, it will be a big test. During President Obama time, when we went to White House, it was much more multicultural, black, white, Latino, all of them were, but now I didn't go to White House during President Trump time, but I don't imagine whether in the corridors you can find any other, or black or Mexican, or Muslim man. This is important for us in Europe, in the world. Inclusivity in regional sense also. Regional orders are collapsing. For example, one of the best example success story was GCC. Even GCC is collapsing now because of this exclusivist approach inside GCC. Same EU is facing a crisis. Catalan issue or Scottish referenda or Kurdish referenda in Iraq, these in different regions, because of this capacity of inclusivity. Either nation states will manage this and establish regional orders, then I can give you a good example of regional inclusivity. During Iraqi war, in Istanbul, we established Iraqi neighboring platform. This in 2003, just before the war. American friends were angry because they were ready to attack. Suddenly we organized a regional forum which continued 6 years. And there, first time ever in Middle East history, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Iran and Egypt, all the neighboring countries were around the table just to agree on territorial integrity of Iraq. For example, now, unfortunately, on Syria, we don't have such a platform to protect Syrian territorial integrity. There are so many examples. If you ask questions, we can discuss more. Inclusivity in global sense. Today, we are not 19th century Eurocentric colonial structures. We are not in the 20th century when there were 2 poles, also 5 winners of Second World War. We are in a global age. We have to accept the reality that in this age, international structure, global structure must be much more representative and inclusive. Like UN Security Council. On what base now just 5 countries can decide for everything almost, and the other 187 countries can just vote in UN General Assembly, which doesn't have any decisive power? On what base? Second World War was last century war. It is over. There is a new, more inclusive structure. When we were chairman, I was prime minister of Turkey, we hosted G20. I instructed my team that the main theme of G20 will be G20 LDC countries relation. And LDC forum was met in Turkey. Turkey was LDC coordinating country. LDC is least developed countries, 47 or 48 countries. We tried to make an economic forum of the most developed and the least developed countries together. Then you can have an international global order. Same for cultural order. Do I have some more time? Maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Okay, I will try. It was a shocking experience for me as a European. For Turks, you may not hear from Turks as a European. No, we are Europeans. Whether some people accept or not, Turkey is part of Europe and will continue so forever. Our history is with Europe, and European history cannot be written without Turkish archives, and archives in Vienna as well. In 1990, I went to Malaysia as a teacher, professor, and without preparation, they asked me to teach history of political thought. Okay, I said. I took my book, went to the room, and prepared a curriculum. But when I saw the students, I was shocked, because it was like a small United Nations. There were Chinese, Malays, Indians, Afghani people, Africans, at least 20, 25 different Bosniaks, different students. But my book is a universal standard, George Sobain's History of Political Theory book, starts with Greeks, continue with Romans, then Christianity, Middle Ages, then Renaissance, Reform, modern ideologies, Marxism, Hegel, Marx, etc., finish. There is no single Chinese name in the book. When China was at least 2,000-3,000 years before Greeks, there was Chinese imperial tradition, not city-state. There was no single Indian name, although Indo-European nations came to Europe, and that Indian Aryan culture was there for centuries. And there was no single Muslim name. If you don't know that Averroes means Ibn Rushd, Avicenna means Ibn Sina, in one page, in one sentence. And there is no African, no Mandela or Nkrumah, not modern, and of course Latin America is. This Eurocentric approach is over. We have to accept the fact that there is a new era. There is a new need for a new global culture. But we are sometimes so Eurocentric as if this is the history. Then I prepared a new course outline, starting with Confucius Analects, Rig Veda's text from India, then Greek, then Romans, and some Persian, then Muslim political thought, then modernity, and in modern centuries as well, Gandhi, Mandela, etc. Try to make it more global. Why I'm giving this example? A global order can be achieved only if that global inclusive character is there. Otherwise, even if we say in Vienna, in Istanbul, in London, in New York, we are humanitarian, we are humanistic. Without embracing all humanity, you cannot be humanistic. This is first principle. There are many other examples to give. Second is internal consistency. Internal consistency. And this is a relation between values and mechanisms. If you respect certain values, you have to respect for everybody. Let me give you one example, which is really disturbing. 49 innocent people were killed in New Zealand. I am grateful. When Charlie Hebdo issue, the terrorist activity in Paris happened as a Muslim prime minister, I went to Paris with all the other leaders. Although Charlie Hebdo, there was an insult against our prophet, for us, nobody has the right to punish anyone because personal punishment. And I was there to show solidarity with French people, with European people, with all the others, with intellectuals. But who went to New Zealand to show solidarity with Muslims? And when this terrorist activity happened in Paris, many European leaders used the terminology Islamic terrorism, Islamic extremism. For last 20 years, we always was trying to say, don't bring religious name with terrorism. They are terrorists, okay, but don't give an impression that terrorism is identified with one religion. But after New Zealand incident, we didn't want, we never used Christian terror, white terror. But it is interesting, Trump's message, there was no single name of Muslim. He says he shows solidarity with New Zealand people, New Zealand community, New Zealand, as if New Zealand as a country needs solidarity. New Zealand is a strong country. But where is solidarity with Muslims, ordinary Muslims' feelings? This is just an example of internal. If you want to have order, if you are a state, then all citizens are equal to each other. If you are a union, like European Union, all states and communities are equal to each other. In globe, all humanities are equal to each other. There are several other examples could be given for internal consistency, but we have to be consistent. You might surprise in Islamic tradition, political tradition, there is a principle. It says, almost all scholars of Muslim thought in the past says, the religion of a state is justice. A state without belief can survive. A state without justice cannot. This is a principle in our traditional political approach. Justice is the religion of the state. Not Christianity, not Islam, not Jewish, not all, not this. Justice. And justice should be implemented without any discrimination. These are the idealistic principles of my proposal in the sense of inclusivity and internal consistency. The reality, they are realistic proposals. The two additional principle is interest optimization and power implementation of power. These are 5 I's I call: inclusivity, internal consistency, interest optimization, implementation of power structure, and institutionalization. Implementation, interest optimization. Today, what we need is a rational negotiation. Rational negotiation creates a common logic, a common approach. But unfortunately today, what we're observing is the emotional politics is rising rather than rational politics. When the counterparts are sitting against each other or together in a forum, everybody comes with his or her own approach, subjective approach, rather than a rational negotiation. In rational negotiation, you have 3 options: either win-win, or win-lose, or lose-lose. If in international relations you have many win-win cases, it means there is an optimization of interests, and this confidence to system is positive. Everybody will believe, so everybody is winning. Why EU is a success story? Because in 1990s, until global economic crisis, in European Union, everybody wins, nobody loses. But after global economic crisis, some start to lose, and that created a problem. In today, win-win case is very rare. Almost there is no win-win case. Win-lose case, which means in one side loses, the other one wins, is increasing. If one side feels always loser, that they are losers, then they lose confidence to the system. Today, Palestinians, for example, they feel that they are always losers. How do you expect from a Palestinian to have confidence to UN or to international system? Because so many promises were given from 1948 until now, lastly Oslo process, none of them has been fulfilled. There are millions of Palestinians everywhere without any identity. Refugees. That creates a sense of frustration. Lose-lose case is, win-lose case is dominant, lose-lose case is increasing. Like in Syrian crisis, is there any winner in Syrian crisis? Everybody lost. Some people may think Bashar al-Assad regime won the war. No. What happened to a country? Is Assad forces controlled? No. In some regions, Iranian militias are controlling Shiite militias. In some regions, Russians are establishing order. In some region, opposition. Nobody won. So we have to have a new era, both in national, regional, and global sense, interest optimization. Fourth is implementation of power structure. You may have ideal things in your mind, but you need a power to implement it. And power should have an ethical substance in it. To get power is a political objective for politicians, but power should be seen as an instrument. And how power is legitimized in international relations. For example, first Gulf War, when Saddam has invaded Kuwait, there was a UN Security Council resolution collectively take all the measures, resolution says, collectively take all the measures to end this occupation. So that power was legitimized by an international organization. Therefore, all the countries had the same objective there. But in the second Gulf War, when George W. Bush, son President Bush, invaded to Iraq, they even misused the evidences, and they went there without UN Security Council resolution. So power, even if they want to achieve something, important is how are you legitimizing your power. And the last principle is institutionalization. Institutionalization is needed to realize these principles of inclusivity and internal consistency in a realistic manner of rational optimization, optimization of interest and power structure. And today, unfortunately, national institutions and regional institutions and global institutions are facing crisis. There is a need of restorations of institutions as the aftershock of earthquake. For example, in the biggest, I don't mean national institutions like collapse of Syrian national institution, no. Assume that American politics, President White House and American establishment, President Trump and American establishment. There's a huge experience of institutional accumulation of experience in American system, in foreign ministry, in Pentagon, in everywhere. But one tweet in the morning by President Trump can change everything. One tweet. And tweet is so easy to write, but the consequences are so widespread. Why? Because of this populism, rising populism. They not referring to institutions. Weberian institutional rationality is not there anymore. And in several other countries, this becomes a model now. In many European right-wing extremism or in Latin America, you can see this, I don't want to say collapse, but irrelevancy of institutions. There is a need of restoration of institutional logic and rationale. Regional institutions, as I said, GCC or others are declining, but more important, global institutions. This is the last I want to say. Throughout century, in modern era, after every big war, there was an institutional renewal in modern era. I don't want to go back to history, to Romans, don't worry. But 30 years war, there was a Westphalian agreement to establish the rules and principles of the new order. After Napoleonic wars, there was Congress of Vienna in 1815, here in Vienna, which established the new rules of the game, which led to balance of power. After First World War, League of Nations. Because of the failure of League of Nations, we had Second World War, and after Second World War, we had a UN system. Bretton Woods system in economics, UN system in political sense. And Cold War was a global war as well, which continued 3-4 decades, everywhere in the world, a bipolar Cold War. Cold War does not mean absence of war. There was a war, ideological war, sometimes hot wars in Vietnam or Korea. And after the Cold War, there was a need of a new restructuring, renewal of institutional structure of global order. In 1991, there was a need of a consensual new international law and order. But nothing has been done. From that time until today, as if there was no Cold War, as if there was not ending Cold War, in UN system, nothing has been achieved as a reform. UN Security Council has the same structure, all the other, but there is a new global globalization in global order, but the order itself is archaic modern, not global, not only even modern. And now it is creating its own challenge. Global economic crisis came out, there was a need of a new financial structure, financial architecture. Architecture is a good term for institutionalization, but almost the only real change was the change of G20 as an annual format. But the other gaps in economic order continued. The gap between the most developed and the least developed is deepening every day. Even between companies, there is a change. So what we need today is a new reformulation of our values of humanity, new mechanisms to realize these values. And the most important two values, if we want to have order, national, regional, or global, inclusivity and internal consistency. The way of doing politics should be based on rational negotiation, and power should be used referring to values, and values should be supported by power, and necessary institutions should be renewed. This is basically what I call the future for projection based on realistic optimism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
But I cannot, the same level, I will not be able to see everyone.
Yeah. So
as a professor, I want to see all the. But we can sit if you want, no problem. For me. But when I sit, I didn't see, for example, the faces of ladies behind. Yeah.
Even more, I'm going also to invent some changes in the order. And the idea is the following. I'm going to ask you one question, but then I'll go to the colleagues because I really want to make it much more inclusive. Yes. And then you're going to have the last word, and here the privilege is that you can decide not to answer some questions. But I'm going to ask you because I do believe it was one of the most consistent presentations I have been hearing recently, because you're right that people are much more kind of excited about criticizing the status quo than to coming with the alternative. The problem of the inclusivity is, and basically having consistency is not easy, because in a certain way, we are constructed in the way to see the hypocrisy of others when it comes to values than to our own. You made a very important point about the reaction. of all of us concerning what happened in New Zealand, and I'm on your side. On the other side, I do believe we have also a very kind of a, in my view, dangerous trend to try to use this also for domestic political reasons. To be absolutely honest, I saw the campaign of President Erdogan recently using the footage of the killing for campaigning for local elections. This is dangerous. This is going to be as dangerous as if somebody is going to use the same type of a footage during the Paris terrorist attacks, because this is changing the idea of who we are as a state, as a humanity. How to go beyond this is my first question. And the second is, I was recently in Turkey with the colleagues talking to a lot of people, and I heard a phrase that made a very strong impression on me. There was somebody who you also know very well who said, do you know, Ivan, the World War II is over, but World War I is not over yet. Mm-hmm. And I have been thinking about this, not in a provocative way. There is something about this. In a certain way, if you look what is happening, particularly in Europe today, you're going to see kind of three different logics of what happened in, for example, Habsburg's former imperial space that went to reintegration with the European Union. You see basically what happened in the Russian federations, what happened in Turkey, and we see also the crisis of the post-imperial states in the Middle East, which was also, I'm very much interested how this idea of the inclusiveness is going to be very much combined with this strive for national identity, for nation states, and how this is going to work in the world which is much more interdependent than ever before. These relations between domestic politics and foreign politics in the world in which it's easier to protect the physical borders than the information borders. Before going to the colleagues also, I have one joke to make listening to you, which was great. We knew that probably the Russians selected President Trump, but we know that you basically suggested President Obama. So please, I do believe that we can pick up people who have a question, so even basically go into the discussion with Professor Davutoğlu, and then we're going back to you in order to basically summarize. Yeah, Miloš.
Many thanks for your very interesting talk. I would like to ask a question. Looking at the whole picture, I found it very interesting that you made a strong point about the ethical fundament of politics, of government. I'm a law professor here at Vienna University, and I would like to ask you about the role of the law. And my impression would be that maybe the legal fundament of government, a constitutional regime, the rule of law is maybe even more important than ethical fundament or values, because in the case of collision, it's maybe the rights are basically more easy, more important to protect by that. But this is just an impression. I'm wondering where the role of the law is in the whole picture and the role of constitutional ideas. Many thanks.
Miloš is also permanent fellow at the Institute. And I'm going to ask everybody else basically to represent himself, please, when you're asking your question.
Thank you very much. I would also like to, Excellency, to revert to inclusivity, as you mentioned, from Roman Empire onwards. What about having more inclusivity for the Kurdish minority within Turkey and outside, to change maybe from a win-lose or lose-lose situation to a win-win situation? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please.
We are asking ourselves sometimes whether Turkey is presently closer to Russia or to the United States. What is your answer to this question?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And yeah, please.
Thank you. I'm Tamás Fóti, Hungarian journalist. Sir, you avoided two topics, the prospect of the Turkish-European Union connections and also the role of Turkey or the prospects in the future in the Middle East between Israel and Turkey. And the second question, if I may, I requested an interview with you and I got an answer that you don't give any interviews. Can I ask you why?
What?
I requested an interview with you and I received an answer that you don't give interviews.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Listen,
Interview,
we basically covered the whole world. But this is a great, I do believe a great
Thank you.
opportunity. And I want to go back to you because really some of the questions that we're talking is critically important. Inclusivity on the level of the international order is very much related to the inclusivity within our own states. And this is true for everybody. In a certain way, many states, they have their different Kurdish problem in the way it's going to be defined. I also do believe that the problem of the rule of law is important because I was recently in Moscow and there was an interesting story where Russians said, we're supporting international law, but we are not going to support a rule-based system because the rules-based system means exceptions. I'm very much interested how basically you're going to read also this coming from this story. And then the role of Turkey. If you go to the United States today, people are going to say, we talk about allies, this and that, but basically Turkey now is a NATO member only in name. To what extent we see also a major geopolitical reorientation of Turkey, which could be right or wrong, but this is a question that, in my view, is also great to be answered. So you have the word.
First,
7:30. There is somebody who is in charge of the final order, and this is Anna. She's going to give us a sign because we promised that 7:30 we are going to solve all the problems of the world.
First, about your first questions. Pain is pain, and for all human beings. Pain should not be subject of a political issue or objective. And if we share pains, yesterday I was in Mauthausen concentration camp, and that was a pain. It was important to know there were 80 Turkish people who were in concentration camp. Some were Jewish origin Turkish citizens, some were Muslim Turkish citizens. But at the end of the day, they had the same destiny. And 20%, I asked there, 15 to 20% of those people in concentration camp, they were Jewish origin. The rest were from Balkans, Serbs, Albanian, Bosniaks. Even there were Spanish who escaped from Franco, came to France, and then Germans invaded and took them to Mauthausen concentration camp. Now, of course, when we look at the history, many people may think that this is just Jewish pain. No, it is a pain of all humanity. Whether Jewish or Muslim, Christian or atheist, human being is human being. We have to agree that this is the principle for us. Then it will be easy to solve issue. But if we declare terrorists by religious names, then you will create a polarization of pains. Pain I observe when I was minister and prime minister. In every Ramadan, in holidays, the breakfast I was doing first day with refugees in camp. When you stay refugees in camp one night, you can see all the pain. And some are Muslims, some are Christians, some are Sunni, Alawats, Kurdish, all these. But it is the fact. So we have to show solidarity with everybody, regardless of their ethnic or religious background, and we have to respect pain. About the First World War didn't end. Yes, it is true. We Austrians and Turks, we understand each other in that sense, because if there are two countries who are in 100 years real loser of the war, was Austro-Hungarian state and Ottomans, because Austria became a much smaller nation state, and Turkey became bigger than Austria, but much less than Ottoman territories. And all the Ottoman legacy became a Turkish area of responsibility. What should be the role of Turkey in that sense? It was surprising for some people, and our foreign policy sometimes was declared pan-Ottomanist, which is not true. For some people, it was surprising. In 2009, when I became Minister of Foreign Affairs, there was a Butmir process by US and EU in Bosnia, which was not successful. I visited Belgrade as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, then Sarajevo, and we established Turkey, Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina trilateral process. Turkish people had a negative attitude towards Serbia because of 1990s, and Serbs usually had certain prejudices against Turks because of historical reasons. But history is history. Today we have a reality that Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina must work together. They will have to live together in Belgrade or Sarajevo. I am really grateful to President Tadic in those days, Minister Vuk Jeremic, myself, Minister Alkalay, our President, Prime Minister. We established a new mentality in Balkans, that Turks and Serbs, hand in hand, work together for a peace in Bosnia-Herzegovina. This same in the Middle East, there was a question on Syria, Turkish-Israeli relation, just to make a reference to it. I was the mediator between Israel and Syria in 2007 and 7 and 8, until Israel bombarded Gaza. It was the most successful peace negotiation between Israel and Syria, and we were very close to a peace settlement. Very close. Only a few words were missing. We didn't say we have a problem with Israel because of Palestine. Our position on Palestine is clear. Palestinian people, like other nations, deserve to have their own state, and East Jerusalem should be the capital city of Palestine. This is not only our position as a Muslim, but Christian position is the same. Christian Palestinians. This is not a religious issue. This is the position of UN on 242 resolution, etc. in many. So we have to be objective and try to. The First World War didn't end, really. And the Syrian-Turkish issue now is because of the border. And that border was not specified by the people of Middle East. It is Sykes-Picot agreement, one French, one British. But the price is being paid even today by the people of the region, and autocratic regimes are trying to oppress people in order to consolidate their power, not to consolidate nation state. So there is a need of a new inclusive approach in that sense in the regions of First World War as well. I fully agree if I am misunderstood about rule of law and ethical formation, and it is difficult to separate these two. Rule of law could be established only if there is a agreed philosophy of law together on certain basis. And ethics, morality, and legality, I don't say legality, legitimacy, not just legality, originates from these common norms and values. I fully agree that rule of law is the basic. But for rule of law to continue, there should be a shared set of values, norms of the society. In Turkey, in several other countries, we are facing this, how to deal. Sometimes it is legal. There are many issues I can give you from our politics or in other. It seems legal, but it is not legitimate. Legality does not mean always legitimacy. Formal legality is something sometimes conflicting with the ethical legitimacy. In my book, I am saying on this basis of legitimacy, which will be appearing, what is the highest level of legitimacy of a political system? Throughout the human history, human beings looked for two objectives, basically. two things they want to achieve: security and freedom. Security is important for existential continuity, survival. Freedom is important for human dignity. Freedom is a human issue, not basically we are human beings because of our desire for freedom and free will. In our region, for example, in the Middle East or in other parts, regimes are telling to the people, I can provide you security, but don't ask from me freedom, because it will risk security. If a political system says to the people, I can provide you security, but not freedom, this is autocracy. Not only in Middle East, in Europe as well today, many political trends, they are saying Muslims are threat, Africans are threat. I can protect you. But if you protect in that way, you are limiting freedom. If a political system or leader says to the people, I can provide you freedom, but not security, that is chaos. Today, national state structures are trapped between autocracy and chaosocracy. There is no racy but chaos. What is the legitimacy here? Rule of law is there to provide this. If a political system says to the citizens, I will provide you the highest possible security without limiting your freedom, or I will provide you highest possible freedom without risking your security, this is the ultimate objective, ultimate level of legitimacy. And rule of law is an instrument for this. At the end of the day, law is for us. We are not for the law. Law is realization of our will. In the today in several places, this is the fact. Coming, next question was on Kurdish issue in Turkey. Exactly here, what it lies. We should defend freedom without risking security. And in Turkey, therefore I mentioned in my speech, ethnicity or multicultural ethnicity is a fact of life because of historic background. And people, once, just to how things are going, just to give an example, I went to Afghanistan in 2009. First time ever a Western or NATO member minister, I went to North Afghanistan, to Mazar-e-Sharif, Balh. And I went to Shibirgan, Cevizcan, close, they were under Taliban threat. And governor of Mazar-e-Sharif, Balh province in Mazar-e-Sharif city, when we came in, we sit, the press was there. He said, Mr. Minister, welcome, most welcome. But we need roads and hospitals in Mazar-e-Sharif. We need schools in Shibirgan. And I invited my ambassador, I instructed him to take all the notes, what they need. And I told them in 1 year, all these things will be reconstructed. Hospitals, schools, roads, etc. One journalist later told me, Governor of Balh is asking from you as if he is governor of Konya. Konya is my hometown in Turkey. So openly, direct, as if he is my constituency in election. I said, yes, you are right. Because Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi of Konya is from Balh. Why I am giving this example? The same expectation is in Balkans. Why? Because the ethnic origin continues in Turkey. And Kurds, in that sense, is not a group different than these other groups. Therefore, we assume that all of them are equal citizens. A Bosniak who came from Bosnia or Kosovo, and Kurds and Turks, they are all together as equal citizens of Turkey. That's how we approached. When we came to power in 2002, there were many limitations on Kurdish people in Turkey. Singing in Kurdish song was prohibited. Speaking in Kurdish was prohibited, etc., etc. There was a series of democratization processes. In my last election campaign, I myself greeted the people in rally in Kurdish, just to show that Kurdish is the language of this soil, of this country. I was heavily criticized by nationalist circles. When I addressed them in Kurdish, they welcomed me, tens of thousands of people. They called me Serok Vezir Davutoğlu in Kurdish. Prime Minister Davutoğlu, welcome. And some nationalistic circles criticized me. I'm Turkish origin, Sunni. They said, as if I am supporting separatist Kurdish demands. I said, if in other countries people address me, Prime Minister Davutoğlu, why you are not disturbed? When our citizens addressing me in their mother tongue, in Kurdish, this is natural, as well as for me it is a respect to me. If they don't address me as a Turkish Prime Minister in their language, how can I work for them? Or if I undermine Kurdish language. This is the fact that we have to be inclusive for all. Not only in Turkey, but outside Turkey, even for Kurds in Iraq. When they were massacred in Halepce, which was anniversary was a few days ago, they came to Turkey. They didn't go other places. For Turkey, in security sense, a safe haven. But what is the limit of this freedom? Public order. No organization can have the right to destroy public order. With my Kurdish citizens, they love me. Even today, when I go to Kurdish populated areas, they welcome me as if I am still Prime Minister. They respect me. But when these PKK groups, despite of our efforts for solution in 2013, they promised to leave arms, to leave Turkey first in months and to leave arms in 1 year latest. But they didn't do so. Then they digged the streets, the cities, the roads, they put blockades, barriers, and divided the cities as if it is Syria. Almost for 1 year, we patiently followed, just to convince them to act according to their promises. But when children going to school were not able to go to school, hospitals were invaded, streets, and there were rule of law. Rule of law is the character of national order. They established some courts, illegal courts, to punish those who are acting against terrorist organization. Then in 2015, July, as Prime Minister, I ordered when they killed 2 policemen, when policemen were sleeping, to fight against terror. So that freedom-security balance should be established. No national government can allow a group of terrorists to invade streets, to prevent schools, to establish parallel courts, etc. But we had a long way to come. Today, the future of Turkey, I fully agree, should be inclusive. Not only Kurds, Alevite groups. We made some reforms we had to make. All citizens of Turkey are equal to each other. This is basically where we are on Kurdish issue. About Russia, US, and NATO, let me answer this question together. When in my strategic depth, I said it was a reinterpretation of Turkish geopolitical scene and geopolitical structure. There I established certain principles I suggested. At that time, I was a pure academician. I didn't have any plan to be minister or prime minister. And one was, which I mentioned, security, freedom, balance. in Turkey and outside. Second was best relation, if possible, zero problem with neighbors, to restore relations with neighbors. Third was effective regional politics in Balkans, Caucasia, Central Asia, Middle East. Fourth was multidimensional foreign policy regarding big powers and also regional powers. And what does it mean? Recently I mentioned in one meeting, Turkey is like a bird which has 4 wings. If these 4 wings are attached to each other in a coordinated manner, that bird can fly much faster, much safer. One is our traditional transatlantic link, one wing, NATO, US. Another wing is EU. Long way, and there was so many discrimination against Turkey. Unfortunately, in 2004, it was a missed opportunity, despite of all the promises by European leaders to us. Cyprus negotiation ended with Turkish side saying yes for peace, Greek Cypriot side saying no. From that time until now, although there was a psychological absence of trust to this process, still Turkey is in Europe, will continue to be in Europe, and Turkish-EU relations are important. That was another question I will answer to this. Third wing is Russia and Asian powers, including China, Russia, because Russia is our historic neighbor. We had wars in the past, peace, wars, but at the end of the day, Russia and Turkey has common interest in stability of Balkans, in Caucasia, in Central Asia. If Russia and Turkey are together, it is a stabilizing force. Turkey, Serbia, Bosnia trilateral process was an asset when, and Russians realized that we are not for polarization or for tension, deepening tension. Same in Georgia crisis. Georgia is our natural ally. But in 2008 war, Turkey, our Prime Minister Erdogan and myself, we all went to Moscow and Tbilisi to ease the tension because we don't want, Turkey is an economic power, and the economic power always want to have stability around. We never provocated any tension, even for Iran, for example, the fourth wing, regional powers. Why did we work so hard for Tehran Agreement in 2010? At that time, the question was, is Turkey pro-Iran or pro-US? Every year, people are asking this question to us. Are you pro-EU, pro-Russia, pro-US, pro-Russia, pro-US, pro-Iran? Why we need to have pro-pro? We are full in a multidimensional world. We have to have good relations with everybody. In 2010, you remember very well, May, after long negotiations, we achieved one of the most successful result in nuclear issue of Iran with Brazil and Turkey, based on the letter of President Obama. I was the negotiator and mediator at the last stage. Brazilian colleague Celso Amerium came. We went to Tehran. We achieved, I don't want to give all the details, but all the low LEU, low enriched uranium, would have been given to Turkey by Iran, and IAEA would be given to Iran fuel. It was, and at that time Iran didn't have middle enriched uranium. But we have been protested. It was not being appreciated, and they think that is Turkey's way away is spreading from transatlantic orientation to pro-Iranian camp. It was a peace initiative. And Turkey and Brazil together, why they were not happy with this? Because first time ever, two permanent member of UN Security Council was able to find a solution for an international crisis. This question should not be asked to Turkey. I mean, you can ask any question, but nobody has the right to question Turkish intention, whether Turkey's good relation with Russia is an alternative to US or EU or Iran. This multidimensional foreign policy is a must for Turkey. And Turkey should act in this direction. I am not now in executive power, but this was, and this is today, I think, Turkish position. Turkish-EU relation, it is a subject of another long session, but let me say, just repeating, EU cannot be a strategic player without Turkey in economic and geopolitical sense. And Turkey cannot have full integrated foreign policy and economic development without EU. We need each other. And if that two needs match together, there will be a new strategic vision for EU and for Turkey. We are not competitors. We are not enemies. We are not other parties, or we are not in Cold War. Turkey is on the other side than Europe. No. But what should we be doing? First, a sense of common destiny. There is no European destiny without Turkey. There is no Turkish destiny without Europe. If we agree this psychology, then the rest will come. In 2016, when I was Prime Minister, we negotiated on migration issue. It was a burning issue for all of us. Turkey was suffering because of existence of 3 million Syrian refugees. Europe was suffering. And for 3-4 months, we negotiated. At the end of the day, we achieved a deal. With good intention, with Angela Merkel, with President Tusk, Juncker, all of us, we were, and at that time, Werner Faymann was Prime Minister of Austria. Today I met him. Day and night we negotiated. At the end we found a solution. And with our common effort, we were able to control refugee flow. But, and it was not just refugee flow, it was a set of agreement to revitalize Turkish-EU relations, having twice EU summit with Turkey, revising custom union, opening new chapters, visa liberalization is the most important. And what happened after I resigned, as if the agreement was made with me, the rest of the commitments were not fulfilled. The refugee flow was controlled, but the rest, nothing continued. And 2017 was the year of election in Europe. Elections are good in democracy, but very bad in foreign policy. As Turkey Minister of Foreign Affairs, I observed this. It is good for democracy, but it is not good for foreign policy and economy. Because in every election, in order to get the people's support, you are becoming more and more emotional, addressing them. And Turkey became, 2017, you had 4 critical elections in Austria, Netherlands, France, and Germany. And Turkey had 1 referendum after coup d'etat attempt. Of course, that referendum was critical. And suddenly, in European election, Turkey became the main agenda, negative agenda, in election campaign, and Europe became the main negative agenda in Turkish referendum campaign. Now it is over. 2018, there was a better, more rational relations. Now it is time to recover. At the end of the day, we need each other. Neither Turks will go back to Central Asia like Eastern question assumed. We will be here. We will be in Vienna. We will be in Berlin, in London, because this is the global era. Nor EU, we can exclude EU from, EU is in ourselves. From Congress of Vienna in 1815 Turkish system is always European-based system. Based on that, I hope there will be a new revitalization of Turkish-EU relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Obviously, you feel very much at home in a library.
Yes,
so,
library is my habitat.
But this should not be a reason not to go back to become a prime minister. Okay. Thank you very much, and waiting for you.
Thank you.